his arrest. Gertrude forced her extreme obsession with cleanliness on Jürgen. If necessary, she did so with physical violence. His mother would bathe him right up until he was 19 years of age and would use the opportunity to sexually abuse him. Jürgen said during one interrogation after his arrest that his mother washed his genitals and that one day he just accepted that this was going to happen. He was never allowed to have any friends in the home, with the exception of one boy. Jürgen liked him very much, but he severely beat him up after the pair had been scuffling with each other in a friendly fashion. There was no apparent reason for the assault. The few friendships that Jürgen did maintain over the years all had an element of homosexual play, which included ejaculation. Growing up, he said that his parents never had time for him and they never played games or nurtured him. They were always too busy with their shop. He was abused and beaten throughout his childhood by his mother, and he wrote in a letter that his father never physically abused him. Jürgen was required to be at home every night by 7 p.m. He would have dinner and then was required to watch TV with his parents in their bed. The ritual consisted of him bathing and then changing his clothes in his parents' bedroom. He never had a closet or wardrobe of his own. And then he was made to lie down on the bed between his parents to watch TV until bedtime around 9 p.m. He was regularly physically abused by his mother, sometimes being beaten up in front of his father, who worked as a butcher, in the same room where he would be cutting up carcasses for the shop. During a psychiatric evaluation, he recalled a time in 1965 that his mother had thrown a beer bottle at him inside their home because he disobeyed her. Later, he was in the butcher shop and was being forced to help clean up. It was a Tuesday because that's when Mrs. Bartsch would clean all of the counters. Jürgen was required to help. She was unhappy with the way that he had done the job, and they started to argue with each other when he said he was finished. She picked up and threw a large knife at him. Jürgen screamed at her, "So that's how it is," to which she replied, "Yes, that's how it is," and spat in his face. After that, his mother ran out of the store to a phone and called the welfare office, threatening Jürgen that Herr Bitter, who was head of the Department of Children and Families at the time, would come and take him back where he came from. Jürgen was so distressed by the occurrence that he ran to the toilet and cried. He had scars from years of physical abuse. For 6 years, Jürgen would be locked in a basement cellar, which would become his bedroom as well as his personal hell. At the tender age of 8 years old, Jürgen was raped by his 13-year-old cousin. He was told by the cousin to lie down on the couch and unzip his trousers. The cousin said that this was a reward for allowing him to use Jürgen's headphones. The cousin went on to be a Catholic child educator and, interestingly, was never called at the trial as a witness. Jürgen didn't know what he wanted to do when he finished school, so at 9 years of age, his father put a tailor-made butcher's apron on him for carnival and said, "Then you'll become a butcher." However, Jürgen also had talked about going to university. At around 10 years of age, Jürgen had become rebellious and was disturbing the Bartsch's way of life at home, so he was sent to school at the Fairground in Bonn. During his school years, he had a nemesis who he called Fat Beckman. Beckman recalled that Jürgen always had a short temper. He said it was fun for the bullies to see Jürgen kicking, and soon it turned into biting. Jürgen would throw away his sandwiches, and Beckman said he most likely learned how to swear from the people who were in the construction site where Jürgen would throw his lunchbox. His parents didn't believe that the school in Fairground was strict enough, when in actual fact this was where Jürgen accidentally discovered that he was adopted. This would have infuriated his parents, so in 1958, at age 12, they enrolled him at the Marienhausen, a Catholic boarding school for boys. It was while he was at home from Marienhausen the first time that Jürgen discovered his cave, the air raid shelter. He'd been exploring with other children from the area and they came across it. He lit a newspaper on fire and they went inside. While in there, he called, "Help!" and everybody ran screaming from the hole. Everyone except Jürgen, who stayed a little longer, before going home to fetch a candle and returning to the shelter to explore more, making it his home, his sanctuary. At age 13, he was raped 4 times by the choir teacher, Father Pulitz. The kids called him Papu. Sometimes he was raped by other students. Papu was known for beating some of the students frequently and violently. During choir practice, he would turn up the music so loud and scream furiously at the students. He would then randomly hit a student, foaming at the mouth as he did so. Jürgen recalled that the students were given a poem to learn in one afternoon. In class the following morning, Papu would call on the students one at a time as they trembled in their seats, his cane at the ready. He would tell them that they needed to recite the poem by heart. If one of them didn't know the part that they were called on, he would hit the student so hard with the cane that it broke. The beatings would always be accompanied by incomprehensible rage and the foaming at the corners of his mouth. When he was 13, Papu chaperoned the children at camp. Jürgen became violently ill. He developed such a high fever that Papu took him to his own room in the inn and put him on the second bed. When Jürgen's chills persisted, the priest took him from there and put him in his own bed. He threw his arms around me like a mother or a father, said Jürgen. As he hugged him, Papu slipped his hand down the back of Jürgen's pants and stroked him. He then did the same thing from the front and tried to masturbate the child. Jürgen believed that it wasn't possible because of his high fever. When he was asked whether there had been any further actions, Jürgen said that a noticeable amount of energy, nothing else happened. The name of the priest was missing from the list of 39 witnesses who were called to be witness at the Wuppertal trial. It was only after his first trial that Jürgen decided to share more, much more, about the priest with Paul Moore in his letters. After the night on the camping trip, Papu never made any special concessions or treated Jürgen differently, unlike the main soprano singer in the choir. He would beat Jürgen regularly as before. To keep him quiet, however, Papu threatened to kill Jürgen if he ever said anything. Jürgen was taken to hospital the next day and was admitted for around 2 to 3 weeks, but after being discharged, his parents, despite his objections, took him back to the Marienhausen school. He ran away the very next day, traveling by train to Düsseldorf, and then with the last of his money by bus to Velbert. He then walked 3 hours back to his home. By the time he arrived at his parents' house, he was sure by then the school had told them he'd run away, and his parents would be furious. He didn't dare go inside. Instead, he went to the woods near his house, and he hid there from his parents until dusk. Someone must have seen him there because he ended up seeing his mother in the forest calling out to him. Defeated, he went home with her and says that began the seemingly never-ending stream of abuse, yelling, and arguing. Before the incident with Papu at Marienhausen, Jürgen said that he had never felt homesick before, but after running away and his parents bringing him back, he started to feel extremely homesick. He couldn't imagine staying there anymore, and he couldn't face going back. Much to his dismay, the school said that they would give him another chance, so his parents took him back right away. Jürgen wrote a letter the next morning to Papu telling him that he couldn't stay there and he was leaving immediately, and if his parents brought him back, he would leave again. When he was 14, he went to live and work as an apprentice with one of his father's colleagues, a master butcher, Herr Lühn. He was given board and lodging, but he worked for absolutely no money. Jürgen recalled that Herr Lühn would make fun of him and said that he was a mama's boy hanging from his mother's apron strings. Throughout his childhood, he was meek and mild and often at the mercy of bullies and attackers. It was in between the harassment, bullying, and sexual abuse that Jürgen developed violent fantasies. When you see photos of Jürgen, he's clean-cut, well-groomed, and looks like what would have been called the boy next door. But he no longer wanted to be the pretty boy. He wanted to be in control and have power, rather than being a victim. Even during his trial, he was described as handsome, discreetly dressed, lovable, and sympathetic-looking. Jürgen didn't turn to killing immediately. However, he was very young when he started his life of violence and crime. He had already been sexually abusing and tormenting young boys. In June 1961, he put his violent fantasies into practice for the first time. Jürgen lured a boy from the neighborhood into his den. He beat him violently, tore off his clothes, and forced him into sexual play. The young boy told his father, who then confronted Gerhard and Gertrude, but also went to the police. Jürgen denied everything to the police, but later confessed the truth to his father, who told him that there were doctors he could go to. Jürgen said that he was scared and nothing ever came of it. The police ended up dropping the matter, putting it down to childish horseplay. All of the boys that Jürgen lured to his air raid shelter, or his cave as he called it, were scared. The only person who felt at home there was Jürgen. This was his safe place. It was his realm. It was to there that he would drive, lead, drag his victims, and his sadistic paradise unfolded. Jürgen was afraid of his mother, but he was not afraid of killing. His life was dictated by his mother's timetable. He committed his crimes within the confines of her demands of him. If ever he was late, he would have to make up excuses for his whereabouts. He knew that other children wouldn't play there, so he could make himself at home, and he did. He hid several blank pistols in the cave, even though at first he didn't have any intentions of using guns. He had a passion for them, and he wanted to have them there. He also had a live 9mm pistol, but was never able to get any ammo for the gun. He'd bought it from another child who lived on the estate near his parents for 30 Deutschmark. Next, there was Axel O. The two already knew each other, though Axel was only 10 years old. Jürgen was 13. There had already been a history of the pair scrapping with each other, and Jürgen had previously masturbated Axel's genitals. This one day, Jürgen lured Axel into the forest, where he forced him to undress in front of him and lay down over Jürgen's lap, with his bum exposed. Jürgen promised that he would only hit him 13 times. But blow by blow, each one harder than the last, didn't seem to end. Eventually, Jürgen had to stop because his hand was aching. He didn't kill Axel, but he threatened that he would if he told anyone, and he left him so that he was able to escape. Axel raised the alarm about the assault, and Jürgen was questioned by the police once again. The matter, again, ended up being dropped after Jürgen said that they'd been fooling around and they had just fought. After this particular incident, Jürgen often returns to and wanders around in the forest near the street, waiting for nice boys. Jürgen has a type. He would only attack skinny or slender boys with dark hair, nice eyes, and who were sympathetic toward him. He was never interested in boys with freckles or red hair or who were overweight. He was only interested in boys of a certain age as well, between 9 and 13 years old or younger, because, as he said, anyone aged 15 to 17 was a grandpa. Stalking through the woods, he came across a number of potential victims, but every time, at the all-important moment to strike, he ended up getting so frightened that he would let the boys go and nothing would happen. Until his second victim, known only as Frank B., was enticed by Jürgen into his bunker. By this time, his masturbation fantasies and the desire to cut were high. He'd purchased razor blades and they were ready to use. He said at his trial that he had bought them from a vending machine for 50 pfennigs. He and Frank started to tussle and fight, and Jürgen shouted, "I'm going to cut you with a razor blade." Fortunately for Frank, Jürgen's inhibitions got the better of him and he didn't follow through. He threatened the boy with death, however, if he told anyone, and allowed him to escape. Until Jürgen's first trial some 7 years later, Frank had never told anyone about the experience, not even his parents. Jürgen, however, did confess to his father about Frank, downplayed the events to make them sound much less serious than they were. Mrs. Bartsch probably suspected more than the simple childishness that she had put it down to, but neither of his parents spoke about it with him again. Later, he entices a younger boy next door into his air raid shelter den. There, Jürgen beats him, tears his clothing from him, and forces him to play sexual games. The boy's father, Beck, goes to the police. This means that Jürgen is no longer able to seek out boys within his village where they live, and he needs to widen the perimeters of his search. On a summer day in 1961, Jürgen is 14 years old. He meets 6.5-year-old H. Jürgen gave H 15 pfennigs to go to the drugstore and buy a candle so they could visit the air raid shelter together. During his interrogation, Jürgen said about the candle, "A flashlight would have been too bright, too sober. A candle gives off a round, warm light. This is more romantic. It's hard to find the right words. Married couples have something like that with certain actions, referring to sexual relations between married couples. When